Welcome to Philosophy from the Frontline. This podcast explores the intersection of philosophy, entrepreneurship, and veteran transition. Join us as we delve into the minds of successful entrepreneurs who have made the journey from military service into small business ownership. Our guests will share their insights, experience, and unique perspectives on life, business, and the world around us. Through deep conversations and thought-provoking discussions, we hope to inspire and empower our listeners to tackle their own challenges and achieve their dreams. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the world of entrepreneurship from a veteran's point of view. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rob Robinson, your host here at Philosophy from the Frontline. I have Staff Sergeant Troutman and Staff Sergeant Schmitz here joining me today, which is pretty awesome to both see you guys again. And let's talk about your book. Without any further delay, Joe, tell us about what made you want to write the book. I mean, I know from a perspective, just broadly, we are heading into it's the 80th year of the Normandy invasion, and that was a pretty critical part of our history militarily, but also in the world. And we're losing those guys at a pretty high rate. So what we have to do is what you have taken done the yeoman's work on, and create a historical account of what happened. But tell us a little bit more about, what got you started, what made you think about this and going in that direction, and why write a book. Thanks.
Well, and I always was writing little tiny snips on Facebook, little tiny recaps of what happened on anniversary dates and everything like that. And it kind of just fell to, I got time on my hands. I want to see if I can make this happen. And it was a huge challenge to try to put everything together because there was so much that happened both before the deployment and after the deployment. But I just challenged myself to try to write one chapter. If I can get through one chapter, I can get through the next chapter, write the outline for the story, write the outline for the deployment, and then kind of mesh it together with tracking down all the details, getting all the historical data, and interviewing the guys who were there to try to get their stories and make sure that their voices are heard in the book as well.
Yeah, and I think that's important because understanding how to capture that stuff, finding your voice in that whole process is important too. So when I started this podcast, it was really just, I'm going to talk to people about transition stories. And like all podcasts, they evolve after the first year or two because you get different inputs that make you want to change the direction that you're going, not essentially the core of what you're doing, but make modifications to make it more accessible to the most people. And so I appreciate the fact that you have actually written a very good story about, some heroes, Paul being one of them. But, so one of the questions I do have, and I know that you've done a lot of work, but honestly, how many hours of interviews have you actually recorded to write this thing? Because that's one of the parts of a lot of authors. We don't get that insight on, what was your research process, because this is a work of nonfiction. And so to really capture the story the best, how long did it take you to really kind of frame this thing up and get the information that you needed?
All right. So it took me 8 months overall to actually sit down and write. That's the writing piece. Now, the interview process, I would say probably about 1,000 hours of being on the phone and text messaging and other stuff with different people from the units. And, I would say at least 2 months solid of working 8 hours a day to actually just get the thing ironed out and making sure that it's a legitimate product and not just a bunch of words thrown together. I mean, it's a legitimate process. Writing is a lot harder than I thought it was.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. And then the other challenge that you took on was, basically editing and publishing this thing as well. And so a lot of people, have these grand ideas like, hey, I want to do a book, or, hey, I want to do a podcast, or, hey, I want to do this. And all these things take a little time and money to do if you want to do it correctly. And so, from the writing process, I mean, you have a 400-page book. I'm sure if you really dove a lot deeper into, the eaches or more of the personal stories that people were telling you, you could have been 600, 700, 800,000 pages. But again, it goes back to accessibility. So I have to balance as an author, same thing with a podcast. How long do I talk? Because there are people that have audiences that can go for 3 hours and people are going to listen to that long form discussion, but depending on the subject matter and the topic, like I may only be able to do 20, 30 minutes successfully. And so, what really made you, get to that point where you had to I know you had to cut some stuff, and I'm sure you weren't happy about it, but editing is all part of the process.
Yes. Well, I tried to fit in as much stuff that helped tell the story and follow along the timeline too, because it's important to know the flow of events. But there is a lot of stuff that I could not fit in. I mean, I easily could have written a 1,000-page book. There's so much content, but you got to kind of like balance it out and make it flow. I mean, I've read this book about 3,000 times just to make sure that everything goes together and it tells the story, and it doesn't stick too much in one point so that you get lost and lose interest. It moves on to the next story and builds and builds and builds. But I mean, it's a lot to try to do that. You have to take piece by piece and make sure, okay, does this overlap with this? Does this overlap with that? Especially when you have the battle sequences and multiple platoons at the same time telling one story. I mean, you got to kind of like fit it all together so that you don't tell the whole battle from one perspective and miss out on from something else. I mean, that took me the longest to do, was the battle sequences, to try to make sure that it kind of ebb and flowed back and forth and the battle makes sense as you're reading along trying to do it.
Yeah. So, unlike a movie, you can't do a quick jump cut to another scene and then run the scene and then jump back. There has to be some type of transition, especially in writing. And so that makes it incredibly difficult to manage. And so I appreciate the work that you've done, because there's a lot of stories there, and there's a lot of different perspectives, because, we had 172 people on the ground, and at most, particularly on August the 4th, we probably had 160 people in contact on that day. And so you literally could get a 10 to 100 page synopsis from each one of those people on their perspective of what happened what was happening at that time when they were there. And even still, like, that doesn't even include people at Battalion, the guys from the other units that rolled out of the gate, as a QRF, or, after the fact, or the S4 guys that came out with resupply. Like, there's all these different things that happen, and trying to chunk those big moving parts together into one, cohesive story and still have a positive narrative or a cohesive narrative is very, very important. But one thing I have to ask, and I have to ask both of you guys about this, like, what's one story that I don't know if you told anybody about it, Paul or Sergeant Troutman or Joe, something that may not be in the book that people need to know about the company and the organization? Because I have my perspective. I legitimately think that our battalion was probably one of the best in Iraq at the time. Maybe, pre-2005, pre-surge, I think we were probably one of the best units as a brigade out there. But again, different flavors, different missions. And I think just from, the kinetic piece of what we experienced, we had a pretty a heavy duty experience there. But what were your guys' thoughts just overall on that first deployment? Because here we are 20 years later and we can actually talk about it, which is nice, because a lot of the classified stuff we just couldn't address in the early part of the war with it going on.
I would say, I mean, I touch a little bit about the raids that we went on in there, but you can't put every single raid in there. The volume that we did between the end of January and the beginning of March of raids, I mean, every single night, snatch and grab, going out there and just demolishing the target deck and going on follow-on raids. I mean, you can't write the amount of raids that we went on into a story, or the whole book would just be about raids.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing. So we got Lieutenant Moreno jumping in on LinkedIn. What's up, Jose? How you doing?
What's up, sir?
And then we've got Amber Schmitz saying, hello, fellows. Howdy. But the reality of it is it's like, yeah, that was a lot. And people don't understand, like, people that went early in the war understand that level of op tempo, where it literally was like, hey, look, we're going to raid, eat some breakfast, go to the gym, hit another target. And I mean, that literally what it was for the first, 96 hours. And you could argue politically that there was reasons why that happened, because there are some organizations, and I think that's one of the things that the folks back at home never really understood, is like, what you saw in the news wasn't actually the ground truth, and that was big. Go ahead, Paul.
And one of the other things too, I mean, I think Joe and I, we've talked about it, many, many, many other times, is I mean, we were working at such a high tempo. I think we calculated we got 4 hours of sleep a day. And that consecutive sleep, I mean, we were literally just going nonstop. And, we're doing this for, a year. And not only that, I mean, the cohesionness, I mean, anybody who's ever been in a unit understands the cohesionness, but for all of us with different backgrounds and everything to start up a brand new unit and come together and make it what it was is just, I mean, I look back on it and I'm like, good Lord, we were a bunch of kids, but look what we did as a bunch of kids.
Yeah. Well, and to jump on that point really quick, one of the things that was lost is there was a lot of tension in the Army with the Stryker coming out. One, because, it was a controversial topic because of General Shinseki was the first thing. And Shinseki did a lot of things that people may or may not deem controversial. At the end of the day, it really didn't matter. But the Stryker was one of those things that was like a cornerstone of people, bitching about that guy as a senior leader in the military. But, there was a large community of people that had grown up on Bradley's, had been to Desert Storm, that were hating on the Stryker from the beginning because it's like, oh, this thing's not going to work. It's not going to be able to take out an M60 or not a T-72 or whatever. But the reality of it is like, that wasn't the mission. The mission was, I have a highly armored truck to dump out a whole bunch of grunts on or near an objective so they're fresher when they get to the target. Because, we all experienced JRTC or NTC rotations where you walk all night and then you hit a target and you're completely ineffective after 18 hours of walking, and everybody knows that. And for anyone to think that the Stryker was something other than that, it just shows that, like, one, they were in on the training and what we were trying to do, but they completely missed out on, what that platform was designed to do at the time in the Army when it was developed. And then the flip side of that was the tail end of the year when all of a sudden everybody's going, hey, bring the Strykers, because these guys can drive, 400 miles overnight and show up in the next town, and surprise, surprise, we're there. But I think that was a big thing. And I know that you've had some conversations with some of the former senior leaders in the organization that kind of filled in some of those gaps for you, Joe. I don't know what you can really talk about, but is there anything that stuck out to you from those conversations?
There was a lot of politics. When I talked to General Rounds, we had a great conversation, and he filled me in on some of the politics that were going on right before we deployed. I mean, going to JRTC was a direct reflection of big Army leadership's they had no faith that we were ready to go. They thought the Stryker Brigade hadn't accomplished their mission of what they set out to do. So that's why we ended up going to JRTC right after NTC. I mean, we're the only unit in the Army that's ever done JRTC and NTC back to back. But that was a direct reflection because they didn't think we were ready to go. So once we ended up getting certified, there was more politics that went on once we got to the deployment. We weren't actually supposed to go forward into Iraq until the first of the year.
Yeah.
But their fourth ID was getting smacked around in Samara. So then they were like, hey, let's send the Stryker Brigade forward.
Yeah. And again, and those are the things that, as your average who on the ground, you don't really see. You're just like, hey, we're going to do this. It was just like, and you and I talked about this before, and I don't know if we mentioned it on the last show or whatever, but like when Saddam Hussein got rolled up, right? Everybody was celebrating like, yes, Saddam Hussein got captured. We're going home. And everybody that had, a brain cell that was functioning at the time looked at each other and was like, we're not going home. We're on orders for the next 365 days. So like things may have changed operationally. We may go somewhere else, but at the end of the day, it wasn't like, oh yeah, we're going home because, something political happened. And, having experienced 3 presidential campaigns while I was deployed, there was a difference between each one of those administrations as they were coming and going. And so that's also one of the things that we have to account for. And I think you did a pretty good job of like expanding, not just to, the stories of the company, but also what was going on in the periphery of that, because there was a lot of people, again, there's entire YouTube channels that was dedicated to, sharpshooting and nitpicking the Stryker from top to bottom, because it was like, hey, it's not going to be effective. And what those guys failed to miss is, what they failed to highlight was, it wasn't about the vehicle, it was about the soldiers, right? And that's what the Army is about. Unfortunately, our services have grown up with, showcasing a particular platform as like their marquee thing. So like for the Navy, it's the carrier. For the Air Force, it's the F-22 and then the F-35. The Army, was the M1 tank, but because there have been a lot of, wide open tank battles, and it became the Bradley, then it became the Stryker, and then fast forward towards the end of the, GWAT, then it became the MRAP. But at the end of the day, the thing that we showcase is not as important as the people, and that's, I think the soft mentality works the best because, people are more important than hardware. But I think there's something that was lost in translation because there was such a push to get this new technology on the battlefield that people focused on the tech and forgot about, all of us that were riding in the back that actually had a mission to do.
And that was, to me, I cut my teeth on the Bradleys. That's what I signed up for. And when I got to Fort Lewis in 2000, they had just taken the Bradleys away, and they were like, hey, we're going to start up this new thing. And, a lot of us, we were like, nope, we're Bradley guys. We're sticking with them. We want out of here. We don't want to do this. But a lot of it had to do with, the officers in our unit that were like, look, guys, this is a brand new thing. Give it a chance, try it out, see what it's like. Let's train up on it. Let's, see what this thing can do. And, our higher ups and even, from the E5s all the way up to you as a company commander really had the morale going of, hey, look, we're going to be a part of something new. We're going to be a part of history. Let's see what this thing can do. And I re-enlisted in 2000. I think I re-enlisted the latter part of 2001 to stick with the unit because, we had already trained up so much at that time, and it was like, okay, well, let's see where this thing can go. And I remember, having conversations with people, and it's like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And it's like, I don't know. This is all brand new. Let's stick it out. And a lot of us did. That's one of the reasons why I re-enlisted, was because I wanted to see and I wanted to push forth the idea of this intermediate infantry brigade just to see how it's going to roll out.
Yeah. And I could tell you, as a guy that sat at brigade for, almost 18 months before getting into command, like the op tempo in 3-2 was absurd. Like, and even the culminating event of doing, so we did MCO2 in July, which with 520, then we did NTC in November, then we did JRTC in January or February or whatever time it was. Then we did the Joint Logistics Over the Shore mission, so we did all these huge moving parts for the Army, and like no unit does that. No unit does that. And we did it to show deployability. Like I ran into people that were naysayers like, oh, there's no way. I've never seen a Stryker fit inside a C-130. I have. Like, why? Because I was there from the very beginning, and all those load X's down there, putting them in the mock-ups and getting everything set to go. But that was all smoke and mirrors to, the grand scheme of the Army. So the majority of the people in the military had no idea all the stuff that we had gone through. Go ahead, Paul.
We even loaded it up there on the tarmac there at Fort Lewis.
Yep.
That short runway, we loaded one up with troops and everything. And even on that short runway, it was able to take off and circle around and come back in and land. Because if I'm not mistaken, weren't we doing like a little mock deployment to prove that it can take off and land on even the shortest of runways?
Correct. And that was the intent of the Stryker, right? I want to have a highly armored vehicle that's C-130 transportable that could deploy. Now, the necessity for that utilization just wasn't there. Could it be done? Like, yeah, absolutely. But it just wasn't there based off of the op tempo that happened. Because once people figured out that like, oh, these things are highly mobile, they get firepower and they bring a whole lot of troopies with them. Guess what? Everybody and their brother wanted a detachment of Strykers because of the flexibility that it provided for their operations. We did 8 cities in 11 months. Not a lot of people remember that. We do because like we lived it, but like on average, like it's not something, it's not something that's touted in the history book, or if you go to the, 3-2 Stryker Wikipedia page, it doesn't talk about all the little stops along the way that we had in that first deployment, and really prove the concept. And if, for those of you guys that are still, on the Bradley train as naysayers, like Strykers were supposed to be an interim solution in 2001, and here we are, it's 2024, and there's Strykers everywhere. So that tells you that there's more to it than just, that initial deployment.
Well, one thing too, to caveat to, I mean, the Strykers were great, but one thing that people don't realize is the soldiers that we had before we ever got Strykers and the way that we trained. I mean, Paul will tell you, from before there were ever Strykers, we shot rounds down range every single day. We practiced entering and clearing the building. We did battle drills every single day. The guys on the ground were already good, but I will tell you that you can see the effects of what a commander can do to a unit, because when we got that change of commander before you, it almost destroyed an absolutely great unit.
Yeah, and I think morale has a lot to do with it. And for those of you guys that are listening to this, or you're listening to the podcast later, understand that like leaders matter. Far be it from you. And like one of the things that I always hated to hear, and so if I ever heard an NCO or a soldier say, "Well, I'll just turn it on when I get to compat," I want to get rid of that person, right? I want somebody that switched on from the very beginning, because the people that weren't ready when we got down range, it showed, it showed, and it was obvious. And we're like, oh, I don't want that dude within the same grid square as me, let alone on a patrol, watching my six. And that was one of those things that completely intangible, and you have to go with your gut. And that's the thing. And like, for me, it was even harder. And I know you and I have talked about it, was just like coming in and not knowing anybody. And like, to this day, if Sergeant Wheeler is listening, thank you. Steve Bridges, rest his soul, thank you. Because if it wasn't for those two guys vouching for me, it could have been a lot worse for me coming into that organization, literally taking command 2 weeks before, the whole organization shipped out, and that was an interesting experience. But, I had full faith and confidence because, again, I was a brigade ammo guy. I knew how much you guys were shooting. So I knew that you were trained. I just didn't know, what was the tipping point of how far you guys were going to go, or how much damage, the previous commander had done before we got, to the operational deployment.
I will tell you this too, and this is one thing that I'll stand by. There was other units that had Strykers, and they didn't perform as well as we did. So it can't all be the Stryker.
Yeah, well, and that was part of it too. And I think really, the difference was when other units were there, it was the mentality and the attitude. And again, the advantage that we had was like, look at it as like a marathon runner or an Olympic athlete. Like, you guys as the organization had trained so much that when you finally deployed, you were peaking, so like at the end of the day, that deployment would have went well, Strykers or no, just because of the amount of training that happened to the lead up. But, being able to leverage the platform just made it that much better, because like, yeah, oh, by the way, I got a rolling support by fire. I can, dump out all these hoolas on an objective that are fresh and are ready to go, versus, again, doing movement to contact all night, which is a royal pain in the ass. Like if you've ever done movement to contact at night anywhere in the Army, mounted or dismounted, that it's going to suck. And if you haven't done a movement to contact, be thankful, because you're probably not in a unit that does it. But like, if you've done a dismounted movement to contact at any point in your military career, you're like, I don't know how we're supposed to survive after walking, from 6 o'clock in the evening until 4 o'clock in the morning, dumping all of our stuff in a patrol base and then going and assault an objective. Like, that just absolutely makes no sense. But it's like, if I can make that movement in 2 hours rather than 6, in a vehicle rather than dismounted, even better. And I think that's just an adoption of TTPs that we were lucky enough to help evolve in the early part to get to where we were when we deployed.
Even the training to, before we got the LAVs that were loaned to us, that way we could start practicing on them. We would walk out, we would do our training, we would walk back in, and then as soon as our gear was cleared, we had engineer tape out there on the quad, and we were practicing, okay, you get any stack? All right, take this room. Okay, what's, we were constantly, whether you were out in the field or whether you were back in garrison, we were constantly going through the movements. We were going through, if this was to happen, what would happen? even when I was a sniper, I would take the platoons out, and I would go ahead and I would let the lieutenants know. I'm like, okay, you're going to be the first one to get shot, in that mock setting, and go, okay, we're going to see what happens with the chain of command after that. Because, and that's when we started coming up with the idea of, every guy who's from, private on up to lieutenant, you need to know the job of the guy ahead of you. And I think that was another thing that helped us a lot, was we trained the guys that were below us to take our jobs. At the same time, we were training our guys, but we were also learning the guys' job ahead of us as well. To where if it did happen, we were still able to function as a unit.
Yeah, the whole training your replacement thing, what a novel concept, right? Like, hey, if I can train the guy that's working with me to do my job just as good or better than I can, awesome, right? And that's one of the things that's difficult, like on the commercial side, or like when you're out of the uniform. Some people don't like that because that rub is not there. Like, I don't want somebody, I don't want my understudy to be able to outdo me, right? But the reality of it is in the military, that's perfectly okay. Two things that's okay in the Army is make sure that your replacement is better than you, and plagiarism. Those two things are perfectly authorized because if it works, why change it? And I think that's something that's very important. But we're getting close to 30 minutes, so I don't want to keep this more than about a half hour to 40 minutes. But Joe, just like cutting room floor, one story or something that didn't make the book that we still need to know.
Man, there's so much. I'm going to tell you a funny story that wasn't from the deployment, that was from the train up.
Okay.
So there was a lot of friction between me and my predecessor, Sergeant Bland. You met Sergeant Bland and you dealt with him a little bit when we were in Kuwait. But me and Sergeant Bland, he was the old bull, I was the young buck. We clash heads, and Paul will tell you, we used to clash heads a lot. So I didn't put this one in the book, but it's pretty funny. He used to, every morning he would go and he would get a Reese's cup, and he would eat one of his Reese's cups, and he would go to his meeting, and he would come back all irritated. And I got mad at him one day, and I ate his other Reese's cup, and then I started eating his other Reese's cup every single day. And one day he came back and he caught me, and he was like, so mad. I'm so irritated with you right now, Sergeant Troutman. And he got a blue paint marker and he put a blue B on the Reese's cup. And he said, everything in this office that has a blue B on it is mine. And me being maybe a little smartass that I am, when he left, I put a blue B on every single thing in the entire office. The computers, the markers, every single thing had a blue B. So Sergeant Wallmeyer and the first sergeant came in, saw the blue Bs, and they were like, nope, I don't want any part of this. You are on your own on this one, Joe, and have fun with that. And yeah, just hilarious.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and I will tell you, and I'll be remiss before we wrap this up, is just to remind everybody, like yes, we lost soldiers on that deployment. We lost 3, right? And those guys truly were our guardian angels. So Wesley, Blickenstaff, and Bridges, losing those guys, it sucked in the moment, and I think it affected everyone. And like one of the things that I've seen, over many years in the uniform, and I'm sure you guys can attest to that, it's like the guys that really get hurt are usually the guys that are the most endearing to the organization, or at least it feels that way, right? So like somebody gets hurt, like, oh, that was my best man in my wedding, or we just took a road trip this weekend together, or like he was the best grandson ever known to man. And so, understanding, that loss and being able to process it and still be successful, I think, for many organizations, that would have been debilitating. But again, it goes back to the amount of training that the company had prior to that incident that allowed you to overcome it, because you were able to just default to your training after that incident happened. And, shout out to Lieutenant Armeni as well. And one of the things that was incredibly frustrating for me was, him not being adequately recognized. So we're going to recognize him publicly here on the socials, but him pulling his truck in front of a dismounted squad, and then his truck eating an RPG-7, and he got wounded. Like, nobody talks about that, but that is certainly one of the pivotal moments of our operational deployment, was Damon Armeni, putting his truck in harm's way, because again, not only did he get hit, but Sergeant Woolrich got hit, and everybody else that was in that truck got peppered with shrapnel when it got hit by the RPG-7. And Paul, we know your story. I don't know if you want to tell any part of it or whatever, but at the end of the day, like on the 4th of August, Paul's sitting here talking to us right now. And like, if you guys don't know, Paul was one of the more significant casualties that we had in the company, but yet and still, he's still here and he's ready to go. And it was something that I always carried with me too, is I used to tell these guys, and you guys will remember this, when I said like, hey, if something happens to you, the best that I can do is have an American pounding on your chest if you die. Right. Yeah. Right. And I say that not in a pejorative sense, but that means like I've gotten you to a point where you're medevaced and you're safe. We had soldiers in our own brigade that did not have that luxury in other parts of the theater that didn't make it back home, and they didn't have, an American pounding on their chest before they expired. And that's a tragedy. I can't say it was good or bad leadership because I wasn't there, but that was my testament to you guys was I'm going to make sure that I move heaven and earth to get you guys back home. And, when you got wounded, Paul, like there was no discussion, when you got hit, and the SOP in the company was, if you lose comms, you head back to the FOP, you get back into somewhere safe, and then you assess the damage. And like when you and Lieutenant Armini got hit, like the guys did what they were supposed to do, and you guys got home, and there's horror stories and everything else of what happened after you guys got to the cache. But even in those moments, like for you guys to survive your injuries, as significant as they were at the time, and with everything else that was going on, is just another testament to, the guys to the left and right of you, because they were able to get you out like in the middle of a pretty damn huge gunfight.
Oh, definitely. No, the one thing that, I know it's not going to be in the story, but a big, shout out to my saw gunner at the time, which was Kevin McFadden, because once I realized that I had no feeling in my legs, he pulled me down and he opened up the body armor, and he was like, searching around for the wounds and everything. And he was like, hey, Sergeant, he goes, I can't find the entrance wound. He goes, but I've got your exit wound. And I was like, all right. I was like, well, plug it. And he goes, and as well as I do, we carried tampons over there. And he was like, stuck one in there. And he was like, well, damn. He goes, that's a big ass hole. He goes, I got to stick 2 in there. And I was like, well, plug it up. I was like, I don't want to bleed out on the floor. And sitting there thinking, in my head, I was like, God, if you're going to take me, do it now, because I don't want my son or my wife at the time to, or my family to suffer. And I remember saying this in my head, and Kevin looked down at me, looked straight in my eyes. I'll never forget this. And he goes, hey, Sergeant, you ain't going nowhere. You're staying right here with me. And right then and there, I was like, I'm good to go. I was like, I'm not going anywhere. We're going to get back in this fight.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, that was the craziest thing, because, like when we first got into theater and Mosul and everything else, it was like, hey, all you got to do is call the cache and we'll shut down the runway and you guys can drive across right to the hospital. And, it sounded like freaking hooey, like, oh, they're going to wave off aircraft to freaking, let somebody get to the hospital. And sure enough, when we made that call, they did it not once, but twice for us in the middle of that gunfight. And that's how you and Damon were able to get to the cache very quickly, is because they opened up that southern gate at the airfield and you guys just drove across the middle of the tarmac and got to the aid station. And like I say thank you to all the people that worked on you, and those were nameless, faceless people, because I didn't even get to see or meet anybody that took care of you guys. But thank you to the good old U.S. Army medical service people that took care of you guys and patched you up at least enough to get you out of theater, because it was impactful. And I think at that point in the year, if we would have lost more people, I don't know if we would have been able to pull out of a nosedive like that, particularly, the stand-in XO. And, again, Paul, you were one of the most beloved guys, particularly in 3rd Platoon, but like the whole company knew you because you were a sniper too. And so it would have been a rough scenario had you not made it back. And I can say that in all honesty now, because we're like 20 years removed from that situation. But, thank the airborne ranger in the sky that you made it home, and we're able to have this conversation today. But one last trip around the horn. So give you guys the opportunity to close this thing out, and then we'll wrap for now. The book comes out on the 4th of August. For those of you guys that are looking, just look up Joe Troutman. It will pop up on your Amazon feed. It is the #1 new release on pre-orders, which is pretty amazing. But like now we've got to work to turn this thing into a bestseller after it's all said and done. But any other comments before we close this thing out?
I think for me, I want to thank you guys a lot because you guys got me home and I was able to, I've got a beautiful wife now. I've got to spend time and raise my 3 boys, Matthew, Whitman, Luke. I've got a granddaughter right now. So on behalf of my family, thank you guys very much.
Wow. That's super powerful, Joe. How about you?
I would just like to say that, all the gunfights, all the raids, all the cool guy stuff that we did, that does not define this unit that we were in. If you read the book and you understand the story, you know that the true power of what we were was that we were an organization that was a family, and we took care of each other, and we brought everybody that we could back. But if you put out a net call today, I guarantee you everyone would answer it, and we would go anywhere in the world and demolish somebody just off of a text message, because that's the kind of people that we are now. And that's that's the family that we are.
Yeah. We have that mentality of 96 hours anywhere in the world, wheels up, wheels down, ready to roll.
Yeah. And I think that's true. And that's one of the things that's, to me, is the coolest part about this whole experience is like catching up with guys, talking about, what happened. It's like we have not been separated for 20 years. No. It literally is like, it's more like 20 minutes. You know what I mean? And like, that's what it feels like when we get together and have the opportunity to talk. So for Philosophy from the Frontline, this is episode 86. This is a special one because we did it live as well. I'm Rob Robinson with Joe Troutman and Paul Schmitz, both former NCOs in Blackhawk Company 123. What's the name of the book again, Joe? Just for everybody's knowledge.
It's called Gods of War, The Legend of Blackhawk Company 123 Infantry.
Yeah, so check it out. It's on Amazon, and be on the lookout for both hard copy and soft copy. So the Kindle book is dropping pretty soon. The hard copies will be shipping, around the 4th?
Yeah, the 4th.
Yeah, so if you order a hard copy, they will ship on the 4th. And take a look at it. You might learn something. You'll get to see a great, at the minimum, human interest piece. But if you're like a war junkie, there's plenty of that stuff in there too. So thanks again for checking us out. This is Rob Robinson from Philosophy from the Frontline. We'll see you on the high ground. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Philosophy from the Frontline with Rob Robinson. We will bring you more interesting veteran transition stories, veteran advocacy, and more information in veterans transition in general on a podcast platform near you. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Thanks.